the Public Services Association. So welcome again, Mr. Baldwin and Ms. Rodriguez, and we will start with Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Baldwin shared a lot of very informative, a lot of great information about the restructuring of the CSO, the Central Statistical Office. A little tongue twister there for me. And so, Mr. Baldwin, we would like you to pick up the reins once again and please continue to share some of the ongoing issues with the audience.
What I want to talk about is to the wider cross section of the community, some of whom are still not aware that there's something called a Central Statistical Office. And many who are aware have been very critical of the organization and its output. And
And why is
sometimes,
that? Why is that?
well, for more than one reason, the statistics that are required are not forthcoming on a timely basis.
And some
And
of those statistics include, for the audience, for
statistics
listening
concerning
audience.
the economy,
Hmm.
statistics concerning travel and tourism, statistics concerning trade and registrar,
And agriculture reports.
agriculture, all these areas. And people know that they can come to the CSO to get information. They come and they're not satisfied that the information is timely, but they don't know the reasons why. And one of the major reasons why the statistical office is not timely with its information is the fact that the statistical office has not had a reorganization. It has remained in the Stone Age since 1972. A lot of the persons with the skills that were required left the organization
Eons ago.
years ago. The new persons coming in are not basically statistically oriented. The Central Statistical Office operates with a professional staff and a technical staff. The technical staff are persons that have to take a training program for 3 or 4 months in basic statistical methods and so on. And they graduate from that course and they become statistical officers and move up the ranks from statistical officer 1, 2, 3 to principal statistical officer. And then there's one position of statistical training officer, which is another promotional position. That's one level of staff. So over the years, they gain a tremendous amount of experience in statistics for which they have been trained. And the practice had been during the period of their tenure, from moving from a statistical officer 1 to a statistical officer 3 and principal statistical officer, you would have received additional training overseas at statistical agencies in specialist areas of statistics. So they remain in the organization with a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience coming through the ranks. They were also heavily involved together with the data collection staff in field operations. So when it came to censuses and surveys, they were the people with the expertise. But you had what you call the professional staff. And the professional staff is a post called statistician. However, there is no degree in statistics at the University of the West Indies. So what happens is that people who had training in economics, sometimes in sociology, applied to the Service Commission for a job in those areas, which were filled, economist positions, and those who were remaining were shunted to the CSO as statisticians. So their conflict became apparent. Here you have the technical staff who begin in range 22 and move at the highest level to range 46. But by the time they get to range 31, etc., they have very skilled experience and have additional training and basic training in statistics. But above them, you have the professional staff who come in as economics, degrees in economics, no experience in statistics, but automatically come in at range 46, which is where the senior technical officers end. So was always that conflict between the two bodies, where the technical people felt that they were being their jobs and their experience being belittled, they're not being recognized, and some of these professional people who come in become their bosses, but don't know the amount of statistics and have no statistical experience like them. But nevertheless, there were one or two who would be humble enough to learn. But there were others who were full of the status of themselves in a position and were prepared to play boss. How? When you think of a statistical office like that and having to produce data and ill-equipped, understaffed, and I mean understaffed both in the sense of numbers and experience and training, and having to produce statistics on a timely basis with a population that while they want statistics, don't like to give information. And I make no bones about it, the major culprit in this area is the business sector, who always demand statistics, always criticize the CSO, always speak about the timeliness and so on of the statistics not being timely and relevant and so on. But Janelle will tell you, she works in the business service section, that is real trouble to get information from these business people.
And why is that, Mr. Baldwin?
We have it's basically a yearly survey that is done on businesses, and basically you're asking for people's financial data. And sometimes people feel that we sign an agreement, what is call it, from the courts, we sign stating that everything is in confidentiality,
Confidential.
but they don't really understand CSO and what it entails and the work that we do. So you have people thinking that they're going to get the information, we're going to get the information out to the public, when basically all this information is just aggregated and used. And also you have also where there are laws if you don't submit your financial data. But because we haven't implemented it on anyone, the big business people will say, well, it's not a big deal. The small businessman who doesn't know will be frightened and come into the office and want to fill out the forms fast. But really and truly, you're more focusing according to the industry that you're dealing with. You basically need the big businesses to understand and to get the data that they need for national accounts.
And how can that be implemented?
At this point in time, I think knowledge of CSO, I think, people, I don't know, there's a confidence, lack of confidence. I think you need to have some sort of, how you could say, learning method in terms of like letting them understand what CSO is all about and the reasons why they need the data. I remembered when I worked under a statistician one time in his industry, what he did was he created reports for them so they will understand when they're giving something they get something in return, right? And I think that he had a understanding with his clients, the people that would submit data. So I don't know, I think CSO used to do that in the early. There was some documentation that you would provide for them instead of always begging them for data and they don't know what they want they're going to be giving or getting in return. So I think it's a matter of knowledge. You have to inform the public as to what CSO is all about.
And then to maybe have persons in place to enforce, to ensure that
Yes.
Well,
the big
well,
businesses do what they're supposed to do.
well, one of the things that's being proposed in the new restructuring would be a marketing section. And I had also advocated that we have a public relations officer who would do all these sorts of things. But imagine you're operating, like I say, in the Stone Age, where you don't have any of these things present. You're collecting data. There's the only form in which you're disseminating the data is by ways of reports. People are not aware in most cases that while we put out a report that may not be timely, we have more timely data stored in the computer, and that you can come into the CSO and make a request to get some of that data. People not aware of it. So some of the business people, however, particularly in the area of trade, when I used to be officer in charge of trade statistics, and we were able to impress quite a few people because we function apart from our job. We function as a public relations unit in itself, so that when people would call and say they want X, instead of just telling them that X is not available, we go down to, we let them know, but you can come in, make a request, and you could get data right down to commodity level. And all that you have to do is to make the request officially. We'll have the data for you. We'll tell you how much it costs. We'll give you a printout. Or if you want it on at the time a diskette or so, you can get it in that form. But that is something that a public relations section officer or marketing division would convey to the public. But we had to do it and give it to people. And a lots of people were very impressed with what the trade section was doing. And in some cases, people wanted to reward us for our efficiency and so on. But of course, we can't accept gifts. So we had to take the praise, and sometimes they will donate computers and equipment and so on. But it is a challenge. And my view of it, I remember at one point in time, we had always have problem with the politicians because I could recall two instances that made our statistics inefficient. In one case, there was something called our major thing was oil, but we were unable to show why oil was coming into the country. The import and export was not tallying. If 10 things come in, 10 million come in, you should see something about the same thing or more going out. We're showing less. Reason for that,
Less going out.
yeah. Reason for that was that there was something that the government had, an agreement the government had with the oil companies whose oil we were bringing into the country to refine under the processing agreement, we call it, which is called UPA.
Hmm.
Under the processing agreement, the government agreed with these companies that they would send their tankers to Trinidad, offload the oil, even though they don't have the documentation present. Documentation being the customs C82 document, which records all imports and export transactions, commodity value, everything, which we computerize to get our data for imports and exports. But here we have a situation where oil comes in, it is not recorded, but oil going out, processed things going out, and that is recorded. So everybody started to attack the CSO, the Ministry of Trade started to attack the CSO, or data not timely and it's not accurate. I asked, together with Mr. Clement, who's currently director, he was head of division at the time. We asked to see, because the Minister of Trade at that time was Mr. Ransom St. Joseph. I remember his name just now. He was upset. So he called the Minister of Planning, who was Mr. Yetming at the time, and complained about the CSO, and he can't get data to serve his clients because investors were asking to come in and they want data. He called the permanent secretary, who called the director of statistics. The director of statistics called me for a response. So I was only too happy to respond. I responded with a long memorandum saying it like it is. When I passed it, then he called me, he said, Bolly, he said, listen, I can't send that to him. I said, well, listen, you asked me to respond, this is my response. I am really not concerned with what you want to send is whatever you want to send, but I have responded. Anyhow, as an response, we asked to have a meeting with the permanent secretary and if possible the minister. Well, the meeting was arranged, but the minister wasn't there. The permanent secretary and one of his top people listened to us. We indicated to them what we wanted. We needed some additional computers. We told him about the UPS system and it hamburging us. And we can't do anything about it unless the Ministry of Finance or whoever responsible do something. This is going to be the situation. But it didn't help. The politicians do their business. It's still in effect. You know what we had to do? Which was not, strictly speaking, legal. In the sense that the legal document that we had to deal with was the C82 form. But we had to approach Petrochin. We held a meeting with them, and I asked Petrochin if they can give us a copy every month of the number of tankers that came in, the value of the oil that the tankers discharged, and the amount of oil that the tankers discharged. We then went back to office and we made out some dummy C82 forms. which only included the number of oil, the amount of oil, quantity, and the value. We made out, well, I can't call it a fake, we used the official form, we put that information in it, sent it to our computer downstairs so that they could input the data and use the data to calculate our imports and exports.
Yeah, but Mr. Bowman, what period, what year was that actually?
Well, all of that would have been, I retired in 2005. So let us say in a 5 year period, 2000 to 2005, all around that time, I would have had to have done that.
Why
And
I'm saying that too is that you say in 2005, but also one of the reasons in terms of like people, not only the awareness, but when you have your minister basically come and say that the staff that work at CSO are underlings, you kind of like and all their enforced commerce, you know, you don't know how hard the members of CSO work.
That's a
You
very
don't know
disparaging
what
remark.
yes,
the conditions they have to work under. You don't know how much weekends sometimes people have to work just to get the data, try to get it on a timely basis. So, besides not being aware, it's also if your minister is not encouraging the staff of
correct.
CSO and they're trying their best,
Yes.
it kind of brings the whole organization. People wouldn't see the organization as something that could be valued, because you have somebody who is high in the organization saying this about your members of staff.
Yes.
So all
And
these things you have to deal with.
how does a statement like that affect the work ethic and the morale of the persons who are
Yeah,
putting blood, sweat, and tears
you
into
you
their
work hard
jobs?
and you have to when they heard the statement, it's like, I can't understand this. You don't know how hard I work. You don't know how much hours I spend. I'm not talking about me, but staff,
Yeah.
doing work under conditions that at this point in time you have health and safety conditions. You have equipment that basically needs to be updated. Even though,
Regularization,
you
tenure.
know, yeah, you have people who are contracted, well, basically we call them permanent temporary, doing the job of permanent staff,
Right.
but they are contracted, on a temporary basis, who have not had vacation for years, have never had vacation. You know,
As long as
people
15
who
years.
people who got pregnant while they were in the organization and being denied maternity benefits. So, I mean,
Is this legal?
But I'll tell you something about that. Apparently, well, not apparently, we have that matter right now on its way to the Minister of Finance, and most likely would end up in the Public Service Tribunal. And because what has happened in 1964, the and this is a bit of CSO
history.
history here. In the 1950s, when the Prime Minister was Eric Williams,
First Prime Minister of
61st Prime
Trinidad and
Minister.
Tobago.
At that time, Mr. Jack Harewood, a graduate in statistics, who later went on to teach at the university as one of the foremost demographers and statisticians in the West Indies. Mr. Harewood had just come back from England and into the CSO, and he immediately set about initiating and holding and conducting ad hoc surveys on employment. And that impressed the Prime Minister. Fact that there was a young black graduate coming back to contribute to the country, and they became close friends. As a matter of fact, the CSO was then under the Minister of Finance, who was Eric Williams himself. And he and Jack Herwood struck up a camaraderie. And Jack tells me that he used to call Eric at his home. Eric used to call him at home. And many an afternoon when he would leave the CSO, he would pass it up and he'd drop into Whitehall and talk with Eric. One of the things that Jack was able to do was to, apart from impressing him on the ad hoc series, Eric then approached Jack and said to him, well, look, these things are so impressive and supplying the type of data we need. Why not have them regular? Forget the temporary ad hoc surveys now. Make it a regular, ongoing process. And then from that emerged what we now call in the CSO the continuous sample survey of population, which does all our labor force figures and all the unemployment figures come out of that system. It employs a field staff and an office staff to, to extract and analyze the data. What Jack Haywood had at that time was a cadre of people who, while not possessing five O levels or any degrees or so, he was able to train in this area of collecting and analyzing data, extracting data, editing and coding documents. And Jack had a whole lot of these people brought in. But they were in temporarily. They were not employed by the Service Commission. And what happened is that Eric told Jack, he said, listen, you doing these surveys, whatever you want, I'll give you. Eric was very powerful in those times. And Jack decided, well, yes, you're going to run this and you're going to hire staff. Presented our budget to Eric, and Eric tell him, fine, fix up. But Eric, in his wisdom, realized that these temporary people that Jack keep bringing in and working on this thing, going to create some problems with the Service Commission because they're not employed by the Commission. And the Cabinet decided in their wisdom to approach the DPA and in fact grant the DPA power to delegate his power to hire staff on a temporary basis in the posts necessary for the conduct of these surveys, and which we refer to now as the delegated authority of the DPA. It was spelled out, it was gazetted, and it was made law. And the DPA sent a circular memorandum to the Director of Statistics, letting him know he's authorized now to hire staff in these particular posts. There were three posts basically: clerical assistant, field interviewer, and statistical assistant. Clerical field interviewer to collect the data on the field, statistical clerical assistant to edit and code the documents, and statistical assistants to do some sort of analysis. And it was gazetted and made law, and the DPA wrote the Director of Statistics, giving him his instruments of authority to proceed. It is still so today. It has not been changed or anything like that. But it is causing tremendous controversy. Controversy because this took place in 64. All the people who would have been involved in it.
That's 48 years ago.
That's right. Either dead and gone, especially up in the Service Commission, the CPO, etc. They have absolutely no knowledge of this thing. However, thankfully, I'm still alive.
Yeah.
I was heavily
Thankfully.
involved in it, and I'm probably the only person who's still relating to these things, who know about these things and
Yes.
how they came
You
about.
have the history.
But nobody listens.
Yes.
The CPO, the DPA, the Accountant General, you draw the law to their attention, you tell them the history behind it, they're not listening.
Nobody's listening.
So they are all breaking the law and saying that these people are not public servants and they therefore not entitled to vacation leave, maternity leave, increments. And so they have been denied for the past 15 or 20 years up to the current time.
Mr. Baldwin, I have to say at this point that, excuse me, that it sounds really sad. Really, really sad that people can work so hard for so long and yet be denied what is rightfully theirs in terms of benefits. It's so hard to wrap the brain around it that this is happening in this modern day and age, still to this day. So my next question is this to you, Mr. Baldwin, because this keeps coming up in my brain like a light bulb, ding, 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 ding. You know, we're being told as a population for a very long time that our current population is 1.3 million. Yet we have seen tremendous growth in our country in terms of people, buildings, vehicles. And we always hear in the news and read in the news the amount of vehicles that are, additional vehicles that are going on the roadways on a monthly basis. So it begs the question, when are we going to have the correct statistics regarding the population. We understand as well that, it's hearsay that there are a number of persons who are here illegally in our land. So how does the Central Statistical Office go about tracing, tracking, getting correct statistics in terms of our population, the growth of the population, how the population contributes to the economy, as well as some time ago there was a newspaper headline that said we need more babies to be born in this country, and I'm thinking, from my interesting point of view, I'm thinking we need more people than we already have. So it seems to me, again, this is just my point of view, I have no evidence of it. It just seems that our population has grown tremendously by leaps and bounds. So how does the Central Statistical Office go about capturing accurate figures in terms of this? I mean, I know a person right now who is here in this country. I'm not at liberty to say the name, but comes in and out every 3 months because the person is Canadian and is allowed to do so legally, come in and out every 3 months, but works here under the table. And there's no record of the person drawing an income, contributing to the economy, not contributing to the economy. So how does the office address something like this?
Okay, that latter issue is the immigration department, not the CSO.
Right.
But I tell you, I'll refer to all that you mentioned prior to that. The CSO captures its data basically from a population census, which you do every 10 years. Outside of the population census, what you have is what we call the mid-year estimates. So using the previous population census, you do an estimate based on growth, births and deaths. It is assumed that if you have 1 million people, whatever figure, 1 million people in the population, and if during the course of the year 20,000 die, this is just being hypothetical, 20,000 die, and let us assume 10,000 born, then your population is depleted by 10,000 people. So if you're working at a 10-year period, 10 that times that gives you 100,000 people. So your mid-year estimates, which is based on that, will tell you your projection for the next 10 years. We will not have a population growth in that case, but we'll have a population decline. So it all depends on births and deaths and migration. Now, while we are fairly accurate in terms of births and deaths, the CSO is challenged tremendously by migration figures for more than one reason. People that leave this country, most of them have intentions of staying illegally in the United States. They go in droves, but we have no record of it.
You have no record of the departure.
We have a record of their departure, but when they leave the shores, they say they're going on vacation.
But no record of their return.
No record of their return. In fact, they don't come back. So, but we can't get any figures from the U.S. Embassy. They themselves don't know how many people stay in the country. They know a lot of people staying, but so we are not able to use any migration figures or immigration figures. There are people who coming in also to as citizens of the country, but a lot coming illegally.
Trinidad and Tobago citizens coming in illegally?
No. People coming into Trinidad and Tobago to live illegally.
Correct. There are many
and
who are here.
we have no record of it. No,
and why is that?
Because the only way you capture it is at a population census. Because they don't advertise themselves. I come in through the boat, I walk off and I go on. No way you know you're in the country. There's no document that will tell us that. So we would expect to pick you up in a population census. But you know something? They all know when the population census is taking place, and they have a vested interest in avoiding the census officer. So if I am a legal immigrant and I'm staying at your house, and I know the census begins today, Monday, and it's running for a month, during that period of a 1 month, you can't catch me by you. And I will tell you, because you up to the thing just as me, to indicate that nobody else lives here. So you don't capture that person but people, the population at large don't understand this. I remember we had a big joke when I used to run the Port of Spain on the census, and we went to the paddocks at the time, A lot of the guys working in the paddocks were illegal. And from the time you enter the paddocks, because you have to get permission to go in, they tell you when fellas jump over the back wall and they're going up into the savannah until they show you leave. So when you get in there, nobody illegal. You can't find nobody. Then you go into areas like the depressed areas where you have a whole lot of them. You can't catch them. Now that's the problem that we have with population census data collection. Enumerators come in, we train them, but there are great problems in getting them to talk to people in gated communities now. A lot of communities are gated, a lot of apartment buildings, and the guards don't allow you to go inside. So I may recall we went to a particular one at the time, and the guard had to say, "Well, listen, let them know, let all the residents know that the census officer will be back on Monday or Tuesday or whatever, and all those who are willing to talk to the census officer should come downstairs." We went down there, nobody turned up. You leave, say, then they'll call the office. They don't call. But then you hear people going on the radio and say, "Well, I know what kind of census they're running because up to now nobody can come by me." But what you're not saying to people is that you can't expect you after you doing a job, you working. While you at work is the time that the census officer will pass by you. He would find nobody home, or he might find one person home who can't respond for everybody. And he would say to the people, "Well, let them know I'll be what we call in the CSO calling back." When could we call back? Well, they say, well, you pass at so and so time, and if inevitably when you pass, then either there or not there, or somebody will say to you, "Well, I ain't," sometimes they answer some of the questions if you catch them, and some questions they tell you they're not willing to answer. Now, we can't officially take any information from neighbors except information that would tell us, well, four people living in that house, so we know there are four people there. So sometimes we have to do what you call a head count. You get no information, but you estimate on the basis that neighbors say four adults living there, or two adults and two children, but you don't know the sexes sometimes, you don't know the age, and you have no information on it. So information collection is a very difficult thing in this country.
Let me ask you this question. Let me just cross you
Yeah.
a minute, Mr. Baldwin. As you mentioned, again, as both you and Ms. Rodriguez are talking, I'm hearing questions that I should ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, for example, when you mentioned about the consultants that you bring in from Sweden,
Yeah.
which country of the world, if you're aware of this information or not, I don't know, which country of the world is considered the leader in terms of statistically being accurate with their population, and how they go about that, and what is the possibility that these same consultants from abroad could help or facilitate implementing that method here in Trinidad and Tobago as well, that would facilitate us getting more accurate information. I'm thinking there must be another way that one ought to be able to collect the data if no one is present at home. Almost everybody is working now.
I like that question, and I'm happy to have to answer it. You see, well, I spent 4 to 5 months in Germany doing statistics.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Yes,
Ja?
yeah,
Sehr gut.
a little.
A little, ein bisschen Deutsch. A little
Yeah,
German.
it's like the mind Deutsch is like.
Ja, sehr gut.
Yes, what they have in Europe, I suppose, is based on wars and the history and so on. They have a registration process. Now, I raise this because you see, we are not very sophisticated in terms of a lot of these things. If you try to impose some of these things in Trinidad, you will hear talk about dictatorship and the government wanted this and that, what going on in this place. But in Europe, particularly in Germany, when you live in a community, if I live in that house across there and I plan to move to go and live somewhere else, I have to fill out a long questionnaire with a whole lot of statistical data and demographic data and lodge it with the police. So at any point in time, they are aware of what area the population would have grown in because so many people have moved into the area and they have demographics on them. Similarly, when they move out, and they use all this statistical data, they don't run a census in the way we do it because they have the data registered already. I remember going to Germany and I first went there in 1979 and a friend that I made, I was trying to trace him 10 years later. And they tell me that I should go to a place called the German Information Bureau. So I went to the German Information Bureau. You go up to the counter, you present your passport, you say the name of your friend, and then they ask you put in on questions. When you last contacted him, what address he was at. And you give them that address and so on, and they keep the passport and they tell you have a seat. When you go back there now, what they would have done, they tracing on you, and they tell you, well, your friend is now at so and so address, and this is his telephone number, and they stamp the document. So when you have that sort of system in place, and I believe when we talk about Sweden, I believe it's a European concept. I don't know if it's based on the experiences with the war, but if it is, the people in have no problem with it. And if you have that sort of system in place, you can trace migration, you know, come into your country, who live in your country without any problem.
So here's the question, Mr. Baldwin. What would it take for Trinidad and Tobago to be willing to implement this system?
My guess is that it is not going to be
Going to be met with resistance.
a tremendous resistance. And I don't think that any politician or any persons in charge in this country feel the candle is worth the funeral. In other words, if we have to implement such a, given the resistance that we're going to have, problems that are going to emanate from the thing, to do what? To tell us what happened with the population? We happy with what's going on.
I guess it's somewhat similar to the situation that we had recently with the change in the traffic with Arapita Avenue, Western Main Road, and Travers Road, and the duration that was given was that they said, okay, let's give it 3 months to see how it can work, because statistically you can only give something, you have to give something a certain period of time in order so that one can observe whether or not it works.
Correct. Yes.
You know, so if something as simple as that became such an issue, was met with such resistance, as you said, Mr. Baldwin, what would it take for the statistical office to be able to implement such a procedure, a policy as Germany has, to be able to facilitate accurate figures?
It's going to be tough, if not impossible.
So then,
but the point is that, do we really want accurate statistics? I ask that question because we have a population that works on perceptions. Perception become fact. And for example, when I go out and I talk among my friends and so on and ordinary people who are not statistically minded, and hey, you work in the CSO. Well, but I hear that I'm what? The women outnumbering men by what?
20 to 1.
20 to 1.
How accurate is that, Mr. Baldwin?
And I say to them, I say, that is not, I don't like that. You know, sometimes before the conversation starts, they don't know I work at the CSO. So I said, no, that's
so
not
then
true.
How you
What's wrong with
respond
you?
then?
I mean, no, not true. That's what the government said. I said, no, they never said. Then I pull around. I said, no. The population statistics, when you look at the 1.3 million people, give or take 1,000, maybe 2,000 difference between male and female.
So there.
But virtually there's no difference.
Okay, so you're saying it's 1 to 1?
1 to 1, basically.
But yet, when we look at Carnival is a female-dominated celebration of our land.
But when we look at cricket and football, it's male-dominated.
Dominated, that's true. Because, but then again, as you just stated, Mr. Baldwin, if Trinidad and Tobago meets with the resistance to implement a procedure such as Germany has in place, then it begs the question, how accurate is Trinidad and Tobago, is the Central Statistical Office in terms of the current population of Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, we can only base our figures on what we obtain. There are never ever in any part of the world where you have 100% accurate record of population figures. Uh,
To your knowledge, which country,
is
from
it
your point of
closest to
view,
it?
is the closest to having that in
I
place?
don't know. I really couldn't say. I would think that the Europeans would be the closest
Really
in
does.
terms of, and maybe places like Japan or so,
Yeah.
because it has a lot to do with history, their history of wars and so on.
Because I understand with Germany, not personally, Germany has a population that's dying.
Yes,
Because most times, Europeans, generally speaking, they want to get your education, travel, and then maybe choose to settle down, maybe have one child. And
yes,
so it's a population that's dying. So they're actually bringing people in from different parts of
that
the
is
world
true.
to implement their skills and so on to grow their population. How
But
accurate is that
lots of
information?
people having problems with that similar. So remember China had a policy recently
With one
that they only
child.
want, now they're changing it. They want more Chinese being born. And somebody else I saw recently saying the same thing. And now we saying the same thing. At one point in time, we were complaining bitterly about the rising birth rate. I remember in the 60s and 70s, there was a big complaint that we have to curb our birth rate. That is when we introduced on a grand scale in Trinidad and Tobago birth control. And there was a big thing, public demonstrations and all sorts of things of how to train women, especially in birth control pills, and to educate them on their rights. Now we gone the other way around because people took the thing seriously, and young people now getting married, not having children. And when they do, they have one child. So eventually they didn't catch up with us. Now you're finding that the population as a consequence is dwindling and the population pyramid is changing.
But yet, statistically, it's being stated that globally, that the world is overpopulated
Yes,
globally.
because when you look at places like Africa and India and some of the those developing countries, there's a spiral in birth rate, a spiral in birth rate. And last night I watched this station very regularly, RT, Channel 84, Russian
Okay,
television.
right.
Very, very
What
interesting.
about Deutsche Welle? DW?
Well, the language problem I have with
Ah,
them because while
German.
I can speak a bit of German, fluent in it, no.
Yes.
But RT gives you the other side of the story, and they were saying that
That's good to know though. What channel is that?
RT, Channel 84,
84.
Russian
Okay.
television,
Okay.
and they're saying that the World Authority is saying that the growth rate is 200,000 per day.
Where?
Annual, the entire
Annual,
world,
globally.
200,000 children babies being born per day. And
That's scary when you think about the
scary.
global
So
resources.
they're saying that right now it's 7 billion, but what is happening? So they're predicting war. And war is going to break out eventually because somewhere, somehow, where they're also talking about the different poisons that killing people, the advent of cancer, they talk about chemtrails and all these things that causing people to die.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be perpetuated because the more people die, the happier they're going to be because the estimate is that you have to bring the population down
Under control.
drastically.
Under control.
Yep,
Otherwise, you'll
the
run out of
food.
global resources.
Well, it was in the context that because of the drought in the United States, there is going to be a shortage of food in 2013, and the food that is available going to be sky high.
Skyrocketing.
How do we then feed this spiraling population? So, there is no wars have always solved the problem of population. But outside of wars, there has been no way found really to say, well, okay, we now have 7 billion people in the world. In the next 5 years, that is going to be cut to 5 billion. There's no way of doing that.
Mhm.
Because while you may have some restriction, 200,000, even if you cut out 100,000 a day, it's still plenty. But how do you go to poor, sometimes illiterate people to get them to change their habits? People living in ghettos is struggling to survive. I look at some of these documentaries on India and Africa, and I say, Lord, you actually in a place like India have is almost like two countries. One country for the rich and powerful, another country where out in the long remote districts where you still have tribes and tribal law, and basically the state is absent. Basically the state is absent. Look at Pakistan. And how do you record number of births and deaths and put population control and those things in the remote places in Pakistan and Afghanistan and all these areas? And then you have the Middle East where you have strong religious backings for things like births and so on. They don't want to hear anything about birth control and all these things. So how do you deal with all of that?
So, Mr. Baldwin, in terms of, based on everything that we've just said, that we've
Yes.
just shared with the audience, in terms of some of the challenges that the CSO is facing, the Central Statistical Office, I'd like to also, in addition to saying the acronym, to actually say what it says, what it means for some of our viewers or listeners who may be in other countries and may not be necessarily apprised or aware of what our acronyms are. But the Central Statistical Office, in terms of its many challenges that it's facing at this point in time, how close or how far is the goal or the target, rather,
Of the
of why the Central Statistical Office exists? How close are you or how far are you from achieving the target?
well, this process for restructuring, for example, one could safely say that it started in the late 90s. Well, maybe started before, but it really got serious in the late 90s. And all around 2000, things began to happen. But it's 2012 now. And I recall in 2004, 2005, when we were dealing with the issue, it was stated that in about 3 years' time, everything would be put in place. It should have been somewhere around 2008 to give arguments, say in 2009, but it's now 2012. And the consultants are now dealing with certain aspects. The Statistics Act has not been proclaimed in Parliament yet. And so we're looking at a process where I can't see anything happening. And given the national issues, the current government will be in office for what? We are not even certain. We raised the question last week, Friday, in the workshop. We don't know whether this current government, the new dispensation, would accept the fact that the last government accepted the consultant's report, final report. The cabinet has accepted it.
Is it documented?
It is documented. But you see, a new government might come into office, look at it, and say, "No,
And throw it out.
and then the process starts all over again."
So it's constantly spinning wheels in mud.
Yes, because you see, in my view, the politicians only become interested in the CSO when they want some sort of data to facilitate whatever they have in mind and they
The
can't get it.
agenda.
Yes.
The agenda
They
of the
make a
day.
lot of noise and they say they will reform, the issue goes away, and then the CSO is forgotten again. When I remember, and history is replete with that. I remember Eric Williams getting up in the House and severely chastising the CSO's unemployment statistics and criticizing it and saying it's inaccurate because the unemployment statistics at the time were stating something contrary from what was politically acceptable. And therefore, the CSO had to be reformed. And he chose to go to the National Insurance Board and take their statistics to say that the unemployment was dropping. Naturally, if you go to they don't do any survey. They have a register of people who employed and not employed. And if you become unemployed, they're not aware of it. They still have your document there. Whenever you get employed again, money start back going to them. He chose to take that information just to denigrate the CSO because it was not agreeing with him and his political views. And subsequently, the same has happened down through the years. Now, you have this current government, when the CSO saying, at one point in time, we had, what, 5% unemployment. And in their view, it went up and it's supposed to come back down again, but the CSO figures may not be saying that. and then they want certain information that they want to have to do something, and therefore the CSO can't produce it. When I was there, it was Moving Assam who wanted to talk to investors about our trade figures and couldn't get them. And I remember I just mentioned the problem. So the CSO was not needed to be reformed, and so they keep going all the time. So I'm not certain. I am hopeful, but I am not certain whether all of this would bear fruit in the near future. If this government, they have another one, 2 years in office, and in my view is that they will become so preoccupied with all that is happening in the country right now that the CSO will have to take a back burner.
Backseat as
Always has
before.
happened. And when you get Mr. what is his name, Mr. Tiwari, making the statement about the CSO recently, it makes things even worse. But we, strangely, the workshop that was held on Friday, you don't ever see anybody at ministerial level present. The PS wasn't even there. That tells you how, because you see, I tell you, my experience now running around the public service and performance management, for example, if the government is serious about public sector reform, in which one of the tenets of public sector reform was the restructuring and the reform of the CSO, but there is nothing that is happening in the public service except we will talk that suggests that the public sector reform is taking place or intends to take place, or if there's any interest in it. Why? The government introduced two things basically in terms of public service reform. One was the performance management and appraisal system for public servants, which was on account of the fact that there was a lot of hue and cry about public servants lazy, they're not productive, they ain't functioning, they ain't working, always keep and come asking for money every 3 years. The private sector heavily critical and stating that this kind of money should be based on productivity. Well, so you introduce a system where you can assess people's performance and separate the goat from the sheep and reward those who functioning and those who not functioning with things like promotion, acting, and increments, etc., increase in salary, etc. But what has become of it? It has been introduced to the public service since 2001, and not one single permanent secretary has implemented the system in their ministry. Not one. And I say that without fear of contradiction. None of the senior officers in the ministries are concerned. I go in and I say to them, there's a performance management system in place. Yeah, we hear you. But this is how we're doing things in here. And they're treating with it as they did in the past. So people don't have position descriptions which give them the duties and responsibilities and set standards of performance for them. That is all the board. They ain't doing that. So then you come at the end of the year, they're not doing quarterly or periodic assessments. And at the end of the year, they get your performance appraisal report, they sit down in the office, fill it out, call the officer, say read and sign. And that is so what you're telling me about public sector reform and concern for productivity and efficiency in the public service. If you have a genuine concern for efficiency and productivity in the public service, this will be important. Permanent secretaries will be held accountable to it, and when they have to meet with the minister, they must be questioned as to what is happening.
Yeah, but one from my
Excuse me.
point of view with regards to the restructuring, I believe that you don't have to, I know we have to make changes within CSO in terms of like large, because I think our products or core products are increasing. But at this present time, I think that change could happen more now in the sense that you don't have the proper resources. You can't provide them, the staff with proper resources. We have vacancies. You could fill these vacancies. You have, in terms of management and in terms of how they deal with staff, you have to have managers trained in terms of like teaching how to supervise staff, how to communicate with your staff. Yes, you have the performance appraisal system, which is there. You have a training policy which you could do things to train staff. I believe there's a process every year we're supposed to submit what training we do or
Yeah.
we're going to do for the year. there are things that could be done at this present time instead of waiting for the restructuring to take place to help or to grow the establishment at this point in time. So I believe, yes, restructuring might take a long time, but I believe things could be done at this moment, to have an effective organization.
So, Ms. Rodriguez, what exactly you're saying is that these particular issues that you highlighted, that is the core products, the vacancies, the management training, you feel strongly that if these issues are addressed and implemented, that it can facilitate moving things along faster. Did I
Yeah,
hear you
I believe
correctly?
so, yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I know we have to change, as I said. I know the Statistical Act will have to change. I know one thing I know of, we do need a proper building to work in, right? But I'm thinking if the government has these things in place, you have a performance appraisal system which is effective if you're using it in a proper way, right? Because in terms of grievances that I hear, when you look at the people's performance appraisal, the management will say they're not doing any work. I fed up talk to them. I'm like, okay, well, where's the performance appraisal? Where are the quarterlies to prove that the person isn't doing any work? You don't have that, so
No
no
documentation.
documentation. And you have it there, but you're not using it. I could understand if you're saying that you're using it and things are not working out, we need to change. But the fact is, nothing is being done. So, how could you want to start something new when you have not implemented what it is you have now? How effective would that be? You will have a restructuring that's taking place, but the management or the people in the organization remain the same. It will end up being the same thing over and over again. You have to change the mentality of people and the way of doing things in order to get what it is you want. And that is not happening.
Ms. Rodriguez, that was so well articulated. Hats off to you.
Thank you.
Kudos, kudos. Because from my interesting point of view, I have been a returning resident, a returning Trinidadian, 10 years now. And for the 10 years that I've been back, we're always hearing about 2020, becoming first world. And, some people that I've had the privilege to interact with, both expatriates and returning patriots like myself, have asked, so what has the experience been for me returning to Trinidad? And yes, it's a beautiful country. The fauna is amazing, some of the most beautiful rainforests in the world. However, as you just stated, Ms. Rodriguez, nothing's being done. It's a whole mindset thing that needs to change. It's not so much that we have money. My gosh, we've been one of the wealthiest nations on the planet for a long time. We are a dot on the map, the size of Washington, D.C., and we have oil, natural gas, and been blessed with asphalt, one of the 3 countries in the world that has asphalt, and we can pave roads around the globe. How lucky can we get? But yet, with all that we are blessed with, it's still a stagnation process that is happening. Yeah. And what the bottom line from listening to you, Mr. Baldwin, and listening to you, Ms. Rodriguez, basically it's a caring thing. How much do we care about our country? How patriotic are we? How much do we want to see our country progress? When we as citizens travel to Grenada, we see little Grenada. Oh my goodness. We see some of the other islands of the Caribbean that we loaned money to. We look at the airport in Barbados. Now everywhere has its faults, we understand that. But there seems to be a lack of that patriotism in our land for people to care. You have people who come into the public service who give their hearts, souls, blood, sweat, and tears to facilitate change and really care. But yet the basic things that are necessary to make that change or to facilitate people feeling rewarded and feeling worthy and feeling appreciated are not there. They're missing. So, Ms. Rodriguez, what are some of those core products that you spoke about that are missing right now in the CSO?
Right now we have basically, though we have a IT department, we have basically computers that are we have basically, I can't say new technology, we have old technology. right? In terms of basically, one of the things the people from Stat Sweden were talking about was, we are an IT technology world. We have to give out data through websites and stuff like that. We have a website, but when you think it's continuously updated, it's just there. So the people will go on to it and it's like, well, why isn't the information here? Because you don't have somebody to update the information.
And when you say people, you're speaking globally. Other countries around the globe wanting to know statistically
Yeah,
what's
you could,
happening with
yeah,
Trinidad and Tobago.
yeah, right. Also, I think for me, core products in terms of like, I would also look at management and I would look at the training, right? I would look at, we have the in-service training course, which is a well in-depth course, right? You have people versed in that, but you can't get them to come into the organization in the sense that most of the people were delegated authority. They are trained in Indian service training. This is something that CSO has for many years, right? In terms of like, how would we say, payments, in terms of like all these things to help
Incentives.
them, yeah, incentive to work, right? For me, those are core products that are missing in CSO. You have a management that, I don't know if they don't care. I can't say, right? But what I can say is that they're not training understanding human behavior. And that's why we have a human management course. So people will understand. It's not like one individual, it's like every other individual. People are sometimes sick in CSO. And it's like you have to do the job. You don't understand the person's nature, their illness. You have to do your job. You have to be there on time. And you don't know if this person can get up from their bed in the morning. So I think an understanding of human nature.
And the to develop on what she's saying, the CSO has a staff of about 250 people. The staff of the CSO alone is possibly more than the staff of the rest of the ministry. Yet the ministry has a human resource unit, and the CSO does not have one single human resource officer. It has to refer to the ministry's human resource unit to make decisions concerning the human resource in the CSO, which they have no idea about.
This is really sad.
It is
Really,
sad, it is
really, this is sad to hear
ridiculous.
this.
And the fact is that, so that you imagine that you, the director of statistics, wants to make recommendations for the filling of vacancies in the CSO, technical positions. The human resource unit in the ministry, who doesn't deal with the CSOs and technical staff, it has to go through them. They're going to look at it and complain about all sorts of issues, raise all sorts of side issues that you don't know anything about, and hold up these things that they never, to date, I don't even know if they have reached to the service commission. And every single decision that has to be made in the CSO, they have to sanction.
You talk about the
It,
traveling. Remember the
look at the
traveling?
traveling.
There was the issue where people, now you have to get an acting a letter for acting, right?
Yes, you have to get, if you, no, remember the CSO's positions are technical positions. And we have a large data collection staff. At the data collection level, everybody at the supervisory stage and up are traveling officers, designated traveling officers. Within the CSO, all the senior managers are traveling officers. Most, if not all, of the senior technical officers are also traveling officers. The ministry doesn't have a clue as regards to why all these positions are traveling positions. But if these traveling positions shut down, no data comes into the CSO, so we cannot produce any statistics. Yet, recently, when one person moves up or is recommended to move up to the higher post, which is also traveling, some gracious lady in the Ministry of Planning's account section decides to stop people's traveling payments. And the upkeep allowance, which is granted to public officers, because you get a car loan from the treasury to operate your car, which is not yours until you fully pay off everything. So that money they give to you is called an upkeep allowance, which basically goes back to the treasury to pay for your car monthly. When you stop that, the loan is still there, they still have to get their money. So you stop giving the officers this money, and yet you're taking the money out of the take home pay now to give to the treasury in lieu of the payment. And you say to these officers, what is the reason why you stop it? Some sort of foolishness. So when the people threaten to stop the traveling, you're threatening disciplinary action. In the context of that, what I mean, what that matter is going to court, because the lady, supported by the director of human resource of all people, say they're quite right to stop these payments. Their justification is that here how foolish it is. If I'll bring it down to myself and Jenna, let us assume she's my senior officer. She's in a traveling position. I am in a traveling post as well. A recommendation goes up to the Service Commission for me to act in her position. A recommendation. No approval has yet come back from the Service Commission. But this lady stopped the payments on the grounds that I am acting. And I am not acting. You're not acting until you get approval.
Well,
But she says that I'm acting, so therefore. So, but even if I was acting, she's in a traveling position as well. So if I am in a traveling post and she's in a traveling post, and she goes on vacation or she moves up to another position, that has nothing to do with my traveling. You see? And
You're speaking specifically about the per diem then. Per diem that one would be entitled to
which is two
having.
things, the upkeep allowance and the outer pocket, which is what you get to put gas in your car,
Yes.
the mileage that you cover. So assuming that I am not getting that, but I still have to do the work
Right.
because I am not acting, I'm doing the work in my substantive position.
Yes.
And my substantive permission means that I have to travel to deal with the officers that I have on the field.
That's right.
So if you're not allowing me to get the money back from the claims for this gas I put in, neither am I given the $2,000 which I get as an upkeep allowance, but the $2,000 is being extracted from my take-home pay. How am I motivated to work? One officer, she'll tell you, had to go and take a loan, a bank loan,
and
and,
at the end of the day, still have to do the work.
and still have to do the work. And these people, I mean, it's madness.
Again, this November 28th is a year that this PSA radio station is in existence. And for the time that we have been present, my colleague and I, Mike and I, have been blessed to interview union members. It is the same story throughout regarding the public service, where you're talking about the building in which people are working. You're talking about the awful conditions where we've got carpeting that's water soaked. So you've got mold setting in. Everybody knows what mold
we
can
have
do to
that.
the human
All
body.
these stories in the CSO. Karyn?
Yes.
We had I think starting November 2010, we have the career reports, fire services reports, the OSH reports. And since that time to now, I would say there has been slight improvement, because there are one of the things with that building, it's very, very old. And there are leaks and nobody knows where the leaks are coming from. What they did was they covered it with tiles. But the thing about it is, if the water is dripping, it will go back on the tiles. You're spending money that's going to be wasted, right? So we have that. We also have where CSO is, it's a flood-prone area. So when it rains heavily, water enters into the office.
Floor.
Yes, the ground floor. Now I see that they put one of those barriers, but at the end of the
Plaster
day,
over the soil.
the building is still old.
Destructive.
Yeah, the structural analysis which we asked for, we haven't got. We asked for the electrical inspection. They gave us the electrical inspection of outside the building, not inside the building. And it is amazing how they spend money on things that the thing is that the building is not good. You're going to spend money on things, and
It's
at
what
the
you
end
call
of the
a
day,
sick building.
yeah, it is a sick building. The career report states that it is it's a documented book with all the issues that exist with regards to moles, with regards to scent, with regards to the air conditioned units, with regards to the vaults. There's a guy who's a vault attendant. Where he sits, there's no AC. There's a hole in the wall. The vault has no AC, no proper working AC. And he basically has to sit down there.
Yeah.
Well, he does the refusal to work following the OSH conditions, refusal to work under health and safety conditions. But you don't know from the vault the scent that comes out of that vault. You have to sit down there and do your work.
And the
It's
sad thing about
subhuman.
it is that when the staff take the type of action that they're supposed to, everybody gets annoyed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they want
Once
to
you put your foot down and stand up for your
they
rights.
want to penalize the staff and threaten action against people, calling them to talk down to them and all that sort of stuff. And recently, she tell you that part of the ceiling broke away behind an
Yeah, an
officer's head and a
officer said
block about
she
concrete
was
block
at
on the
work
side.
sitting down and it's a lucky thing she wasn't close to where it was,
Mm.
but close enough
She's like where you are,
Mm.
and
behind.
the wall is about the same distance there as this wall is
Yes.
behind me. And that piece of the ceiling above there, with a big concrete slab about that size, crashed down behind her.
Oh my
For if
goodness.
she had been reclining back on it, she might have been dead today.
Yes, yes,
And yet
absolutely.
that doesn't trouble anybody. Not a soul.
Well, let's see in closing now, in terms of where we're at,
Hmm.
in terms of we have, I believe, I addressing some of these issues, ongoing
Well, I tell
issues.
you where it is. The only thing remaining at that point would be